A wail tore from my throat, raw and primal. The pipe clattered to the floor as I pulled her into my arms, rocking her lifeless body like a child clutching a doll. My friends watched, silent now, their judgment heavy in the air. And in that crushing moment, I realized the cruelest horror of all. The monster in this story wasn't her. It wasn't some lurking entity hiding in the shadows. It was me. The factory fell silent after her final breath, as though the building itself was mourning. My friends slowly lowered the cake, the candles extinguished by the cold draft seeping through broken windows. No one spoke. Their eyes told me everything: confusion, grief, and the kind of revulsion reserved for someone who had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I knelt in the center of it all, holding her body, trembling with the weight of what I had done. The blood seeped into my clothes, staining me in a way that would never wash away. The memories came flooding back in cruel fragments: the vacations she had mentioned, the stormy night when I asked her to marry me, the small traditions we'd shared that had once defined our lives. All of it returned too late, arriving like shards of glass piercing through my skull. I could almost hear her laugh, the way she teased me for being too serious. I could almost feel the warmth of her hand squeezing mine in reassurance. But the body in my arms was cold, her hand limp, her lips silent. I wanted to scream at the universe, at the cruel twist of fate that had robbed me of memory and tricked me into killing the one person who had loved me enough to never give up. Instead, I sat there, broken, rocking her gently as though motion could coax her back. The others didn't move closer. They didn't comfort me. They simply stared, witnesses to a nightmare made flesh. And I knew in that moment that I wasn't just a man who had lost his wife. I was the murderer of my own happiness. That night has carved itself into me like a scar I can never hide. The factory, the faces of my friends, the blood on my hands, they haunt every corner of my mind. I tell myself it was the accident, the amnesia, the gaps in memory that pushed me to doubt her. But deep down, I know the truth. I let fear win. And because of that, I destroyed the only person who ever stood by me. Now, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I sometimes hear her voice, gentle, warm, whispering my name like she used to. For a moment, I believe she's still there, but when I turn, the bed is empty, and the silence that follows is heavier than death itself.
Then, a sound cut through the stillness. Surprise! The word echoed, multiplied, bouncing from wall to wall. My knees buckled as figures emerged from the shadows, dozens of them. Friends, faces I suddenly recognized with painful clarity. They carried a cake, their expressions frozen in disbelief as they stared at the blood dripping from my weapon. And just like that, the pieces snapped back together. The factory wasn't just any place, it was our place. My friends and I had spent our youth here, making it our secret refuge. It was where we celebrated, where we laughed, where I first kissed the woman who really was my wife. Their faces twisted from joy to horror as they took in the scene. Me, standing over her body, the pipe in my hand. And then the faintest pressure on my leg. I looked down. Her hand, blood-soaked, trembling, clutched at me. Her eyes, once so bright, were dimming, but her gaze locked onto mine. And in that last moment, I remembered everything. She truly was my wife. The room spun, my chest heaved as the truth crashed down on me like a collapsing ceiling. She wasn't a stranger, she wasn't an imposter. She was my wife, the woman I had loved, the woman who had waited by my bed, the woman who had planned this, whatever this twisted gathering was meant to be, out of devotion, not deceit. And I had struck her down. The cake dropped from someone's hands, splattering across the floor in a grotesque parody of celebration. My friends' voices rose in a storm of disbelief, shouts, curses, panicked questions. Their faces blurred, but the disgust was clear, painted across every expression. I stumbled backward, pipe still in hand, sticky with blood that should never have been spilled. My arms trembled, my stomach churned, and yet I couldn't let go of the weapon. It had become a part of me, fused to the guilt weighing down my soul. Her hand gripped my ankle weakly, her eyes searching mine. She tried to speak, but only a wet gurgle escaped her throat. I fell to my knees beside her, sobbing, choking on apologies that could never be enough. I didn't know. God, I didn't know. But the words sounded hollow even to me. Around us, the factory seemed to tighten, its rusted walls echoing every sob, every gasp. The hooks above swayed as if mocking my collapse. My friends dared not step closer, frozen by horror, as if proximity might taint them with my madness. And then, in that suffocating silence, clarity burned through the haze of my fractured mind. The accident hadn't just stolen my memory, it had twisted it, carved holes where love once lived, replaced trust with suspicion. I hadn't recognized her, not because she was a fraud, but because I was broken. Her breath rattled, shallow and fading. Her blood pooled, creeping across the concrete like a spreading shadow. I pressed my hands against the wound, desperate, useless. "Stay with me, please." But her eyes told me the truth long before her body did. The light in them dimmed, flickered, and finally went out. When she disappeared through the factory doors, I pulled out her phone, left carelessly on the console. My hand shook as I dialed the number on the card. After several rings, a voice answered, soft, cautious. "Hello? It's me. I don't know my name," I stammered. "But they said I was in an accident. I'm with this woman. She says she's my wife, but..." The nurse's tone shifted, concern slipping through. "Andy? Car accident? Out with the... wife?" The pause after that last word made my skin crawl. "Yes, but I don't remember her. Please tell me, how do you know she's my wife?" Before she could respond, the passenger door creaked open. My heart stopped. She stood there, smiling down at me, but her eyes flicked to the phone in my hand. "What are you doing?" Her tone was calm, almost playful, but there was a razor hidden in it. I fumbled for words. You had a call. I thought it might be important." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment too long. Then, with a chuckle, she plucked the phone from my hand. "Wrong number. she said lightly, though the way her smile didn't reach her eyes made me shiver. Before I could react, she tied a cloth around my eyes. No peeking. I don't want to ruin the surprise. Her hand guided mine as she led me forward, step by cautious step. The air inside the factory was damp, metallic. The ground echoed underfoot, and faint drips of water punctuated the silence. Curiosity, or maybe survival, pushed me to lift the blindfold just slightly, scratching my cheek as cover. The sliver of light that reached my eye revealed a nightmare. Rusted chains dangled from the ceiling, hooks swaying gently as though moved by unseen hands. Long tables stretched across the room, their surfaces corroded and stained dark with things I didn't dare name. I quickly lowered the blindfold before she noticed, my heart hammering. "Almost there," she cooed. Her grip on my hand was steady, almost tender, as if none of this was out of the ordinary. But then I caught it, the scrape of metal against the floor. She was dragging one of the bags across the ground. From within, something clanged, inescapably steel. My mind reeled. A knife. The glimpse I'd seen in the car wasn't a mistake. Panic clawed at me. She was going to kill me. That much I was certain of. But why? And why go through the charade of pretending to be my wife? I forced myself to breathe quietly, to mask the terror. If she thought I suspected nothing, maybe I could find a way out. Her voice broke the silence. "You're awfully quiet. Nervous?" "I'm just adjusting," I murmured. She laughed softly. "Don't worry. Once you're inside, you'll never want to leave." I risked another peek. This time, the sight stole my breath completely. A pristine metal table, gleaming under a single hanging bulb. A brand new knife rested atop it, its edge gleaming. In a room filled with rust and ruin, that table stood out like an altar prepared just for me. That was then certainty hardened into conviction. She wasn't my wife. She wasn't here to help me. She had brought me here to end me. My hand brushed against a loose pipe on the floor, cold and slick with condensation. I tightened my grip around it, weighing its heft. My chest heaved with each breath, torn between fear and fury. She turned then, catching the faint lift of my blindfold. "No peeking," she sang. And that was the moment instinct took over. I swung. The first strike missed as she ducked with uncanny speed, but the second connected. A sickening thud reverberated through the room as the pipe struck her shoulder. She cried out, stumbling, eyes wide with something between shock and betrayal. I hit her again and again until she collapsed, twitching on the concrete floor, crimson spreading beneath her head. Silence. I stood there, pipe shaking in my trembling hands, horror flooding me. What had I done? My breaths came ragged, my vision swimming. I had killed her, or at least left her broken, bleeding, no longer moving.
I pressed my forehead against the window, watching the familiar yet alien world blur by. Roads I should have known, landmarks that should have stirred recognition. None of it did. My chest tightened with the weight of a question I didn't dare ask out loud. If she truly was my wife, Why did she feel like a stranger? The drive stretched on, each mile pulling me further from the safety of the hospital and deeper into uncertainty. She kept glancing at me with a brightness in her eyes, as though waiting for me to suddenly remember everything and laugh along with her. But all I could do was nod, my palms damp against my knees. After a while, she pulled into a crowded department store parking lot. The car slowed, then stopped, and she turned to me with a mischievous grin. "Wait here, I'll be right back." "Can't I come with you?" I asked quickly, my voice sharper than I intended. Her grin widened, almost teasing. "No, it'll ruin the surprise. You live." She slipped out before I could argue, vanishing into the sliding glass doors. Alone, I stared at the dashboard, then at the bags already sitting in the back seat, plastic stretched taut, layered, concealing whatever lay inside. My head throbbed as if my brain were punishing me for trying too hard to remember. All I got in return was a stabbing ache behind my eyes. When she finally returned, her arms were heavy with more bags. She tossed them into the back with an exaggerated sigh, then leaned close. Her tone was playful, but the words chilled me. "Sorry for keeping you waiting. I just have a feeling things are going to get messy." She said it with a wink, as if sharing an inside joke, only I wasn't in on it. I forced a laugh, my throat dry. My mind spiraled. Messy? What could she mean by that? The car lurched forward again, but instead of heading back to the main road, she veered off onto smaller lanes, narrow paths lined with trees and cracked asphalt. The hum of civilization faded behind us, replaced by silence that pressed against my eardrums. I risked a glance of the bags, pulling at the edge of one before her sharp voice cut through the cabin. "Don't look." I snapped forward, heart pounding, but not before catching a glint of something metallic. The brief flash etched itself into my thoughts. Steel, sharp, hidden beneath layers of plastic. My stomach twisted. She noticed my unease, leaned closer, and whispered with a smile too wide to be comforting, "Don't worry, your surprise is to die for." The words hung in the air like a noose, tightening around my throat. The roads narrowed until they felt like veins running through the wilderness, carrying us further from anything familiar. She drove with a kind of reckless joy, humming a tune that sent cold ripples through me. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but every glance toward the back seat pulled my eyes toward the bags, those heavy, layered shapes that seemed to shift with the car's turns. My mind kept circling the same desperate questions. Was she really my wife? Was this all some delusion born of my damaged memory? Or was there something more sinister lurking beneath her cheerful facade? The silence became unbearable. "So, what's in the bags?" I asked, forcing casual curiosity. Her hands tightened on the wheel for a split second, then relaxed. "Don't ruin the surprise." Her voice was sweet, but there was an edge beneath it, sharp enough to cut. I stared out the window, trying to focus on the landscape. Trees gave way to open stretches of land, then to crumbling industrial buildings, their brick walls scarred with graffiti and broken windows gaping like wounds. Something in me recoiled. Finally, the car slowed in front of an abandoned factory. Its steel doors hung crooked, the parking lot overgrown with weeds that cracked through the concrete. The entire place exhaled a breath of decay. "Here we are," she said brightly, as though announcing a romantic getaway. My pulse quickened. "What is this place?" She only smiled. "Our spot. You'll see." She killed the engine, grabbed the bags with surprising strength, and hopped out. I sat frozen, my fingers brushing against the pocket where I'd stashed the nurse's card, my last tether to sanity.
The first sound that dragged me back into consciousness wasn't the steady beep of a machine or the hushed murmur of doctors. It was a gasp. A sharp, startled intake of breath, so close to my ear it made me jolt even though my body felt too heavy to move. My eyes fluttered open to a ceiling washed in pale fluorescent light. A hospital room. Tubes clung to my arms, machines hummed in rhythm with my shallow breaths. My body ached, but it was my mind that hurt the most. Like there were pieces missing, gaps where something important should have been ripped out. A nurse leaned over me, her smile soft with relief. She said I'd been unconscious for nearly 2 weeks after a motor accident. Words like amnesia slipped from her lips, but none of it landed as heavily as the phrase that followed. "Don't worry, your wife has been here every day. She'll fill you in." My chest tightened. Wife? Before I could even ask, the door burst open. A high-pitched squeal of joy filled the sterile room, and suddenly a woman crashed into me, her arms wrapping around my fragile frame. She smelled familiar, spoke with an intimacy that should have comforted me, but all I felt was the icy chill of a stranger's touch. I stared at her face, searching for recognition. Nothing came, not even a flicker. And in that silence, one truth began to echo in my head. I don't remember ever having a wife. The days after waking blurred together in sterile white walls and fluorescent lights. Doctors came and went, poking at me, shining lights into my eyes, asking questions I struggled to answer. My body was battered but healing. My mind, however, was a fractured mirror, jagged pieces reflecting only fragments of who I used to be. And always she was there, the woman they called my wife. She sat by my bed, her laughter bright, her hands warm when they brushed mine. She told me stories of our life together. Holidays we'd taken, the first apartment we rented, the way I proposed under a stormy sky. Her words painted a portrait of love and history, but the canvas in my head remained blank. I studied her every movement, the way she tilted her head when she teased me, the sparkle in her eyes when she leaned close and whispered things only a spouse should know. It all seemed genuine, too genuine, and yet deep in my chest an unease gnawed at me. I glanced down at my hand one night when she thought I was asleep. No ring. The skin bore no indentation, no pale circle that suggested a band had once rested there. When I asked her, she smiled gently, almost rehearsed. "You always hated wearing rings. Your fingers are too big at the joints, remember?" Maybe she was right. It made sense. But I couldn't shake the hollowness in my chest, the void where memory should have lived. Meals came and went. My strength returned little by little. I laughed when she laughed, smiled when she kissed my forehead, but the motions felt borrowed, like I was acting in a play I'd never rehearsed. One morning, she leaned over my tray of half-eaten hospital food. "Wait," she said, catching my wrist before I took another bite. Her eyes gleamed with some secret thought. "Don't finish, I have an idea." She left the room, practically skipping down the hallway, and returned minutes later with an energy that overwhelmed me.
bags clutched in her arms, urgency in her voice. She stuffed my belongings into them, glancing toward the door like she expected someone to stop her. "What are you doing?" I whispered, wide-eyed. "We're leaving," she answered simply, as if that solved everything. "The nurse said you'd be fine. Besides, don't you want to get out of here?" I hesitated. Part of me screamed to protest, to wait for the doctors, to cling to the safety of the sterile walls. But another part, weaker, yet strangely compelling, urged me to follow. She was my wife, wasn't she? And what kind of husband would refuse such enthusiasm? I spotted a business card on the nightstand, a private number scrawled in neat ink. The nurse who had been tending to me. I slipped it quietly into my pocket before she noticed. A lifeline, just in case. Moments later, I found myself in the passenger seat of her car, the hospital shrinking in the rearview mirror. She drove fast, humming to herself, a smile never leaving her lips.